Okay, folks, welcome back to the next video in this series. Unfortunately, I've got a new laptop, which is fortunate. It's a little bit better than the one I was using. Got a better video card, a little bit more RAM, better CPU. So hopefully things will run a little bit better. Um, the, Unfortunately, the problem is I'm I've recorded a couple of videos and just had terrible audio problems. So I'm going to record this video. Unfortunately, I wanted to sort of document everything I did, creating this game, and now I've got a gap here where I've implemented a bunch of stuff that I don't have on video. So I guess what I'm going to try to do is go through and explain everything I've done to catch up to where I'm at. First thing is I dug up a old PlayStation controller I found and hooked it up using a little DS4 Windows utility to connect it to make it behave like an Xbox controller. So once I got that hooked up, I came into my input context and I set up a lot of these aircraft controls to have, instead of just using the keyboard, you can also use the gamepad. So I got the shoulder buttons for the throttle, the thumbstick for the aileron and elevators, the D-pad for the rudders. I hooked up the right thumbstick to move the camera around so I could see the control surfaces moving. I hooked up the G key on the keyboard to put the landing gear up and down, and I hooked up the space bar and the bottom button on the gamepad to be the wheel brakes. I also started using, instead of using the little test map I had, I started using I created just a blank open world map because I needed, it helped seeing the mountains there helps to, just helps a little bit better to tell where the aircraft is at. When the ground was flat, it was like there was no reference point. I couldn't see how close I was to the ground. So I switched to using this map, which is not big enough, but it's at least big enough to take off and, fly around over it. I've also hooked up the animation blueprint. So this is unfortunate that this didn't come out on video. First, I'll show what I did to the aircraft and the aircraft animation instance classes. I added actions, obviously, for landing gear and wheel brakes. I already had the main control surfaces. I'm handling the triggered and completed events, and the reason why is if you do use the keyboard, you need the completed event to fire to reset the value to 0. So I'm handling triggered and completed. For the landing gear, I'm just handling the started event. And that's because if you use triggered, as you hold the key down, it'll fire over and over. I just want it to fire once. So I'm handling the started event for that. And then on the wheel brakes, I'm handling started and completed. So as you hold the key down, you press the key down and it'll set the brakes to engage, and you let off and it'll set them to completed. And I'm not sure why this camera move triggered. I'm assuming that's a BS warning there. If we look at some of these, you can see elevator triggered. I just grabbed the value of the controller itself, and then in elevator completed, I set the elevator to 0. So that's how those are all working. Landing gear started, I check to see if the gear is down. If it's down, I set it to up, and if it's up, I set it to down, basically. And then wheel brakes, there are 3 brakes on the aircraft, center, left, and right. And I set, when you hit the wheel brake button, set all 3 of them to 1. And then when you let off of it, I set them all to 0. Then in the rudder, when you trigger the rudder, I'm also setting the nose gear steering. So, and it needs to be clamped. So if I've got the rudder control all the way to the left, the nose gear should be at negative 45 degrees. If I've got it all the way to the right, the nose gear should be at 45 degrees. So this is how that's working. It's clamping it and then setting the steering to that clamped value. I hooked up all my new methods in here, and then in the anim instance, just like I did for the character in an earlier video, I set a bunch of variables, all the variables that I'm going to need in the animation blueprint. I create those variables here, and then in the update animation method, I grab all of the values I need from the aircraft component. So I had to create an inline method here to get the aircraft component because the aircraft movement component is private. So this method just makes a public getter method that I then use in my anim instance. I get the aircraft component, grab the aircraft state object, and off the aircraft state I get the variables that I need for elevator, left and right aileron, rudder. This is the steering that I set in the rudder command. And then for the landing gear, what I'm doing is the JSP sim component actually handles the raising and lowering of the gear over time. So I don't have to handle that. All I have to do is grab the normalized position of the landing gear, and I do 1 minus that position because it's the value is sort of backwards from what I need. So that gives me the landing gear position. And so when I hit the G, this will go over time, and it's about 4 seconds. It will go from 0 to 1 or 1 to 0, and this will grab wherever it's at in that range. So now that I have all those variables set in my anim instance, I created an animation blueprint. So if we come into my aircraft folder, I now have an animation blueprint for the F-16. And if you look at the skeletal mesh in my blueprint, I have the animation blueprint set here. And then if we pull up that animation blueprint, I can show everything that I've done. And I've used the animation blueprint that came with the aircraft as a reference to create this one, using my C++ class as the base. So if we take a look at this, to animate the rudder, I'm taking that rudder angle that I'm setting in my anim instance, making a rotator out of it, and modifying the rudder bone on the aircraft. So if we take a look at the skeleton, we can see there's all kinds of bones here, and one of them is going to be the rudder bone. It's right here, and if you take a look at it, if you modify the bone, it moves it back and forth. And so there's bones for all of the control surfaces of the aircraft. There's bones for the wheels. There's a bone for the canopy to move it up and down. Bones for the elevators. So that's how we move all of those control surfaces in the animation blueprint. Notice also, I'm not using any of them yet, but there are a number of sockets on the aircraft. One for the gun, which is located here. One for the countermeasures, which is under the belly of the aircraft. And then there's sockets for some of the pylons here. We're going to make use of all of those later. I just want to point them out now so that you know they're there. There's also a couple of navigation lights here that we'll implement later. There's all kinds of stuff left to implement that I have not implemented yet. So the way this works is, if we take a look at this modify bone node, I've set the bone to modify to be the rudder, and I've set the rotation mode to be add to existing, and rotation space to be bone space. I've done that exact same thing for the elevators. This is the left elevator and the right elevator. I'm doing the exact same thing, taking the elevator angle, making a rotator, and setting the bones. Same thing again for the ailerons, which the model calls flaps. So the right and left flaps, I'm setting them from the left and right aileron angle. And then the nose wheel, I'm taking that nose gear angle that I clamped that range and setting the front chassis 2 bone, which is, if we take a look at front chassis 2, you can see that that's the nose wheel here. So we're setting this rotation. So that's how that's working. And then I go into animating the landing gear. So this is a little bit different because we have animations for the landing gear. And if you take a look in this anim folder down here, if we dock this up here, you can see that this animation which is exactly 4.12 seconds long. If we take a look here, I'm taking that landing gear position, which is the normalized position of the gear coming from JSB Sim, and I'm lerping it from 0 to 4.12 and setting the explicit time on the animation. So basically, as the nose gear closes, this will be, say, 2. Well, it'll be somewhere between 0 and 1, and that will map from 0 to 4.12. So say we get 2 seconds, and we want to show the animation at exactly 2 seconds in this frame. And we do an additive, apply an additive for that. And then we've got the output pose. And what all that adds up to is, if I run, let me grab my gamepad here and move the camera around so we can see things. If I hit the right rudder, you can see the nose wheel. You can see it move, and I'm just using the D-pad so it goes straight to max deflection. I'll eventually change this to use an axis, but for now I'm just using the D-pad. The reason I'm not using the thumbstick is because I want to use it to be able to move the camera around for now. So that's the nose wheel, and you can see also I'll get a little bit of rudder. Now the rudder's not deflecting much because I'm on the ground, but you can see the elevators. I get good deflection on those, and the ailerons as well. Now if I give it full throttle, and then if I back off and hit the brakes, we'll see the brakes work. I let off the brakes, it starts to move again. Give it some throttle, and hopefully I can take off before I hit the mountain. Nope, a little bounce off the mountain there. Now that I'm airborne, if I hit the G key, you can see the aircraft slowly retract, and that's the animation sequence playing as JSP Sim lowers and raises the gear. We're just telling the animation sequence where it is and it smoothly animates. So I just want to show this video so you could see where everything is at right now. Unfortunately, it sucks that my videos didn't record properly, but this one looks like it's working good. So hopefully I won't have that problem again, and I'll come back in the next video. I have a few things I need to do. I need to, now that I have the gamepad working, I'd like to update my soldier character to work with the gamepad as well. And there's still a ton more work to do on this aircraft. I do want to show one unfortunate thing about these models from Vigilante. They're really great models, but there are a couple of problems, and the main one is if we wanted to make like a realistic sim using this model, we would have a problem, which is this cockpit doesn't really work for a let me grab the gamepad here. It's a little easier to move the camera around. It doesn't really work for a cockpit, a fixed cockpit camera, because good grief, it's hard to get this in a good spot. If we wanted to fix the camera, say right here, you can't really, first of all, the textures are very low res. None of the buttons you can't really read any of them. And the way this panel juts out in the middle, this center console, you can't really see these screens very well. Maybe in a VR situation it would work, because you could look around, but with a fixed cockpit camera, this just doesn't really work. You'd really need to rework the way this whole cockpit is laid out in order to make it work well for a fixed camera. And then none of these switches are, if I were to make them clickable using some sort of widget, I wouldn't be able to actually move the switch itself, because the switch is part of the actual mesh. And so I guess really what you'd want to do, I guess, to use this as a realistic sim, you'd have to bring this into Blender and do a bunch of work to it. Maybe that'd be more work than it's worth. Maybe it's better off just doing your own model. Also, these fuel tanks are part of the base mesh, which isn't really right. You wouldn't always want fuel tanks, potentially on the aircraft. You'd want to be able to choose whether or not you had fuel tanks here or not. So those are problems that maybe you'd have to solve, by modifying this mesh in Blender. Maybe that would work. Or really, if you want to do something realistic, maybe you're just better off making your own model. Anyway, this is the model I got, so this is what I'm going to use, unless I happen upon something better out there with that we can make flickable switches with and all that stuff. So for now, I'm just going to continue using this model, and I am going to do a cockpit camera, even though it's not really going to work out all that well, because I want to be able to create a HUD. So I'd like to be able to fly it from inside the cockpit and have a nice HUD here. So that's what I'm going to do, even though this, isn't really set up to work out the way I want. But we'll see how far I can take it when I get there. But I did want to point that out, that these models do have a couple of issues, even though they are really excellent models. And the fact that they have so much, I just can't. I feel like I got to do something interesting with them. So That's what we got, so that's what I'll work with. And for now, this is where my animation blueprint is at. There's still a bunch more to animate. One of the main things I would like to figure out next is when you're on the ground and you're rolling, I would like for the wheels to animate. Currently, you can see as the aircraft rolls, the wheels just stay stationary, which that's one of the next things I want to tackle, I guess. And then this exhaust nozzle on the back is meant to animate as you manipulate the throttle. So I'd like to get that working as well. So I may do that next time. I also, like I said, I want to fix up the character to work with the gamepad and fix the aiming a little bit. So I may do that as well. We'll see how far I can get. So anyway, it's a bummer those videos didn't record well, but I wanted to sort of record this catch-up video so that everyone would that's following would know where I'm at and would understand how I did that animation blueprint. So that's all I got for now. Until next time, take care. I'll see you in the next video.